The rain's already started. Let me tell you a story, no rush, no noise, just a calm place to rest your thoughts. But before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button. By the way, what time is it where you are right now? The Girl Who Sketched the Moon. It started sometime in early spring, when the evening still carried a bite of wind, but the trees had begun to remember how to be green again. I'd been walking the same path through the park most nights, not out of purpose, just habit, a way to settle the restless pieces of myself without having to name them. It was a quiet route, mostly empty, especially after sunset, when the last joggers disappeared and the world softened into its nighttime hush. I'd walk past the swings, the sandbox, the rusted slide near the far fence, and loop around by the row of benches that lined the edge of the playground. That's when I first saw her, a girl sitting at the very last bench, head bent, pencil moving in quick, sure strokes over the page of a spiral-bound sketchbook. She didn't look up, didn't glance around, just kept drawing, completely still except for her hand. She couldn't have been more than 20. Hair tucked behind one ear, jacket sleeves pushed to her elbows, a satchel bag beside her feet, like she came here every night and knew no one would take it. I didn't stop, just noticed her, kept walking. But the next night, she was there again, same bench, same sketchbook, same quiet, absorbed focus. It was the third or fourth evening that I realized what she was drawing. I caught it in a flash, the glint of white pencil on black paper, curves and shadows, something round and luminous, slowly taking form beneath her hand. The moon, but not the moon that hung above us in its usual faraway glow. This one was personal, full of texture, soft cross-hatching, angles I'd never really noticed before. It looked like she knew it, like she wasn't copying it from the sky, but remembering it from somewhere deeper. I passed by again, slower that time, and she looked up just once, not startled, not inviting, just aware, and then returned to her drawing. That was it. But something about it stayed with me long after I got home. The shape of that moon on the page, the silence she held around herself like a coat, the way her presence felt like it had always been part of that path, and I was only just now learning how to see it. I didn't plan to keep walking that way, but I found myself returning more evenings than not, as if my feet had begun to learn the path on their own without needing permission from my thoughts. It wasn't about seeing her, not exactly. I didn't know her name, hadn't spoken a word, didn't even know if she noticed me passing by most nights. But there was something about the sight of her, seated on that same bench, with her sketchbook open and her head tilted just slightly to the side, that made the world feel less fragmented. I began to time my walk so I'd arrive just after the sun had dipped far enough to stain the trees in that slow gray gold wash, when the first stars hadn't yet appeared but the air had already cooled. She was always there before me, already drawing, already immersed in whatever she was trying to catch before the light fully left the sky. I started walking slower as I passed, not lingering, not staring, just letting the moment stretch a little longer, as if pausing near her gave me permission to feel unhurried. And slowly, I began to notice things. The way she tapped her pencil softly against her knee when she was thinking, how sometimes she looked up at the real moon wherever it was in the sky that night and smiled, like it had spoken to her. How she used different colors of paper, not always black, sometimes a soft gray, once a deep blue, that made the white chalk lines shine like breath. She never wore headphones, never brought a friend, never seemed restless, just there, fully and entirely. I envied that. Not in the bitter way, in the aching way, the way you recognize something you've forgotten how to feel. Presence, focus, a kind of quiet joy that didn't need to be shared to be real. And though I never approached her, never even stood still for more than a breath, I began to feel as if we shared something, a rhythm, a pattern, a ritual made of quiet nearness. I wondered if she knew I passed by each night. I wondered if it mattered to her, but I never asked. Some connections aren't built on words, they're built on presence, on the soft grace of simply returning to the same place over and over, and letting that be enough. It was a Wednesday, one of those early summer evenings when the day fades a little slower, like it's reluctant to leave, stretching the light until everything is cast in gold so soft it feels like memory. I had worked late that day, sat too long at my desk, lost track of time until the sun had already dipped low, and for a moment I almost didn't go on my walk at all. But something pulled me, not urgently, just gently, and I found myself heading down the path, past the fountain, past the hedge that always rustled when the wind moved through it like a breath, until I turned the familiar corner toward the playground. And there she was, as always, in her usual spot at the far bench. Only this time, something was different. She wasn't drawing. Her sketchbook was closed in her lap, her pencil resting between her fingers, forgotten. She was looking up at the sky, not the moon, not that night, but the empty stretch of blue-gray just above the treetops, the part of the sky that never seems to hold anything at all. And then, as I passed, she looked at me, not accidentally, not briefly. She looked at me as if she had known I'd come, as if she had been waiting to mark the moment. Her gaze was calm, not curious, not searching, just there, present, acknowledging, and I looked back. For the first time, I let myself return the glance fully, not a polite flicker, but something steadier. I nodded a small thing, just a gesture, but honest, and she smiled. Just once, just a slight curl of the corner of her mouth, like the kind of smile you give when you've shared a joke in silence with someone across a room. I didn't stop. I didn't say a word. I kept walking, heart beating a little differently than before, not faster, just deeper, as if something inside me had been gently tapped awake. That night, I couldn't sleep, not in a restless way, more in a stirred way, like the surface of my thoughts had been moved by something tender. And I kept thinking about how she'd looked at me, not with expectation, not with invitation, but with recognition, as if, for the first time, we had seen each other not just in passing, but as part of something shared, a rhythm, a ritual, a sky too wide for words. After that night, the rhythm didn't change. She was still there each evening, and I still passed by the same way, not stopping, not speaking, but everything felt subtly rearranged, like someone had turned a light on behind the curtain of the same familiar scene. Her sketchbook was open again, the pencil once more moving steadily across the page, but now, when I walked by, she'd glance up just briefly, just enough, and I'd offer a small nod, or a smile if I felt brave enough. And there was something about those moments, those quiet recognitions, that began to shift the atmosphere between us. It wasn't that we were friends or even acquaintances. We didn't know each other's names or stories or what kind of music we liked or how we took our coffee, but there was a softness in our exchange that felt more important than any of that. We were two people who had learned how to be near one another in silence, and now, in the wake of that one shared glance, that silence began to feel like something held together. I noticed more about her now, not in the way you notice a stranger, but in the way you begin to learn the shapes of something familiar. The way she tugged her sleeve down over her hand when she was thinking. How she sometimes stared into the sky for long stretches without drawing at all. Just watching as if waiting for the moon to show her something she hadn't seen yet. And every so often, she would hold up a sketch, just for a second not facing me directly, but lifting it slightly, like an offering to the air, and then tuck it into her bag without explanation. I never waved, I never lingered, but I began to feel something soft unfold between us, not a friendship, not a love story, not anything you could name or expect, just a thread woven from consistency and the quiet miracle of being witnessed. And somehow, knowing that someone saw me walk by each night and chose to look up even for a moment made the world feel less separate, less lonely. Like maybe, just maybe, there were ways to belong without ever saying a word. The first night she wasn't there, I noticed immediately, not because anything else had changed, but because the air itself felt slightly off, like the harmony of the space had gone a little out of tune. I walked the same path, past the same familiar shadows, the same low rustle of leaves along the fence, the same quiet swing set creaking gently in the breeze, but when I reached the far bench, the one where she always sat with her sketchbook and soft concentration, it was empty, not dramatically, not suspiciously, just empty, like a seat that had been recently vacated but hadn't cooled yet. I slowed my steps, then caught myself and kept moving, trying not to look like I was looking for something. I told myself, maybe she was late, maybe she'd come tomorrow. Maybe people miss a day sometimes, and not everything needs to mean something. But even so, her absence landed in me like a skipped note in a song, subtle but noticeable in the way silence can sometimes be louder than sound. That night, back at home, I found myself sitting near my window a little longer than usual. I didn't do anything, just sat there, eyes unfocused, listening to the quiet, and I realized that over these last few weeks, her presence had become part of my evening, not in a possessive way, not in a way that demanded anything from her, just as a rhythm, a soft constant, a point of stillness I didn't even know I'd come to lean against. I missed her not in the way you miss someone you know, but in the way you miss the scent of a season that's gone, or the sound of birds that used to sing outside your window before the trees changed. I missed what she brought to the bench, to the sky, to that space between us. And though I didn't know her name, or where she lived, or why she chose that spot to draw the moon over and over again, I knew something real had passed between us, something wordless. And now that it wasn't there, I felt its shape more clearly than ever, like light still lingering where it once fell. The next evening, I walked slower, not out of dread, but something closer to reverence, like I was approaching a memory instead of a moment. The park was quiet again, the sky dimming in that familiar hush that always made the trees look softer than they did in daylight, and the wind carried that faint scent of early summer soil, warm and a little damp, Like the earth itself had exhaled, I told myself not to expect anything, that she might not be there again, that maybe whatever this was had passed without needing to say goodbye. But when I reached the bench, my steps slowed because, once again, she wasn't sitting there. The space she usually filled was still empty, still quiet. But this time, something had changed. At the far end of the bench, resting on the wooden slats like it had been placed with care, was a small square of black paper, folded once through the center. My heart did a strange, quiet thing in my chest. Not a rush, not panic, but a soft flicker of warmth, like recognition. I approached carefully, sat down at the opposite end, and reached for it only after a moment had passed, as if I needed to let the silence hold us both for just a bit longer. Inside was a sketch, hand-drawn, white pencil, the familiar texture of chalk and graphite pressed into the page. It was the moon again, but this time it wasn't alone. In the lower corner of the page, she had drawn a figure small, seated on a park bench, face tilted upward, legs crossed gently at the ankles. And next to that figure, another one, standing, just a little taller. The two of them didn't touch, didn't face each other, but they were there, side by side, beneath the same wide moon. Above them, in tiny handwriting, almost hidden in the shadows of the pencil strokes, was a single line. "Thank you for keeping me company." That was all. No signature, no name, but I didn't need one. I held the sketch in my lap like something fragile and real, like the kind of thing you don't frame or display but keep somewhere close tucked in a drawer between pages of a favorite book, beside letters that mean more than you'll ever admit. I didn't know if she'd return tomorrow or the day after. I didn't know if this was goodbye or simply a pause. But I knew this. What we had shared had been seen. It had been felt. And in her quiet way, she had told me something deeply human. You were here, and it mattered. The night after she left the drawing, I walked the path again, not because I expected her to be there, but because I didn't know how not to. The routine had become more than just something I did after dinner. It had become a rhythm I moved to, a quiet tether between the days that made them feel less like passing time and more like presence. And though the bench was empty again, I didn't feel disappointed. If anything, the emptiness held something now, a kind of warmth, a trace of someone's having been there, the way a room feels different after someone you love has just left it. I sat down for the first time, folding myself into the spot where I'd always seen her, and for a long while I didn't think. I just looked up at the sky. The moon wasn't visible yet, but I watched the space where it would rise, letting the quiet stretch around me like a blanket. It was strange how something so small, so wordless, could change the shape of my days. I hadn't known her, not really, but in another way, I had. I had known the care in her drawings, the way she showed up for herself, night after night, the softness with which she allowed the world to witness her without apology. And I had learned something from that, about stillness, about choosing gentleness over noise, about how connection doesn't always need a name or an explanation to be real. I didn't know if I'd see her again. I told myself it was okay if I didn't. Some people move through your life like moonlight, brief, beautiful, and never quite yours to hold. But they show you something while they're there. They light up a part of the world you hadn't noticed before. And afterward, even in the dark, you remember. You walk slower. You look up more often. You start to sketch things, even if only in your mind. And without realizing it, you begin to live a little more like they did, with care, with presence, with quiet wonder for the sky. I still walk through the park some evenings, not every night now, not with the same quiet urgency I once did, but often enough to feel the rhythm of it in my steps, like a melody I hum under my breath without meaning to. The bench is sometimes empty, sometimes occupied by other people passing through, a couple sharing headphones, a boy in a hoodie sketching in a tablet, once a small child sleeping, curled up in her mother's lap. But I no longer wait for her to return. I think part of me knew all along that it was never about the routine, not really. It was about what it opened in me, what it reminded me to notice. The moon still rises, steady and slow, and I look up at it more now, not searching for answers, but simply in gratitude. There's a drawing on my desk, framed in soft wood and glass, the one she left behind, with the two figures sitting quietly beneath a sky too wide for language. I look at it sometimes when I don't know what to feel. I let it remind me of things that don't need explanation, the way some connections bloom in silence, the way presence can be offered without expectation, and the way a single moment unspoken, unplanned, can stay with you long after it's past. I never learned her name, never heard her voice, but I remember her every time I choose stillness over distraction, every time I notice the shape of light on pavement, every time I sit with a thought long enough to understand it. She was a part of my life, even if just for a season, and there's something comforting in that, in knowing that we don't always need grand beginnings or neat conclusions to be changed by someone. Sometimes the simple act of walking past the same bench, of nodding to the same person, of sharing a sliver of moonlit time, sometimes that's enough. And in a world that rushes so fast, that forgets so easily, there's something quietly extraordinary about being remembered, even by someone who never said your name.